Welcome to our community. Susie Thomas here with you this morning, visiting with Bob Phipps. He is, tell me your title, please, Bob.
I'm the Director of Development
at Community Hospice. And let's start out basically with what is Community Hospice? How long have you been around?
Community Hospice has been around actually 30 years. This is our 30th anniversary. We've started in Tuscarawas County. And then in a little after 1986, as we got our feet wet and started serving patients, we were asked to kind of expand both into Carroll County and Stark County. So we've been in the Stark County area since about 1991-92.
Which is amazing to think that that's 30 years ago, isn't it?
It is.
Wow, did that time fly. And Community Hospice, your goals, the purpose of it is...
Well, our mission statement is to bring peace, hope, and compassion to those we serve. Obviously, we are coming into people's lives at a very critical time. You know, we talk all the time about how life comes into the world and how we surround parents and the newborn with a lot of support. Well, we feel the same at the end of life. It's really about life, not about death. But we want to be a support and a ministry to that family as they're saying goodbye to a loved one.
That has got to take a very special person, that is when you are so involved with someone's lives. And you really are with people at a very melancholy, very sad, reflective time, I would even say. What kind of wear does that take on you and your volunteers and people who work for Community Hospice?
Well, while I'm part of it, I'm not a direct caregiver, and so for me it's a little easier. But for our caregivers, you know, our volunteers, our nurses, our aides, our social workers, our medical director, all those that surround the patient, they have chosen this as a very unique field of medicine. Of all the other things they could do in medicine, they really feel called to this. And yes, it is difficult because, you know, probably the end result with each of your relationships will be that day that you have to say goodbye. But we like to try to serve that patient well before that and really look at quality of life, you know, in those last months, weeks, years, whatever it might be.
Well, that's interesting that you say months, weeks, years. When is it the right time to call for hospice? I always think of that as being when the end is very, very near, then it's time for hospice. But you're saying this can be an ongoing relationship for even years?
Well, let me go back to admission criteria, and I appreciate you asking, because this is one of the greatest misconceptions out there. People feel like they need to call for hospice, you know, the week of somebody's passing.
Yes.
And we really encourage people to think further ahead than that. Medicare lays out most of the rules that govern what we do. Medicare criteria says that if a patient has a life-ending illness, and it's not just cancer, it can be any illness that will in the end take their life. And according to two doctors, usually it's their family physician and our medical director, they certify that that patient has 6 months or less to live. Then they can be admitted to hospice. Once we have them, then Medicare requires every 6 months we do an evaluation. So we've had patients with us for 6 hours, 6 days, 6 months. We've had some with us for 2 or 3 years, and that sounds a little bizarre, but because they were still meeting the criteria every 6 months, they were able to continue on in hospice.
So you actually see some people get better, yes?
That's an interesting thing, because I can just think of a patient we had in our inpatient unit maybe 3 months ago. He came in and the family really didn't think he'd make it to the weekend. As we started to provide the support that we're able to provide, and you know, our expertise is end of life, so there are medical things we can do to reduce pain, bring comfort, and not restore anything. That's the difference between hospice and palliative care. Once you're in hospice, it's kind of no more heroics. We try to stabilize, we try to bring comfort, relieve pain. But sometimes that begins to relieve a lot of symptoms. And so most families will experience with their loved one, they actually seem to get better for a while. And that's because we've helped them bring that comfort and the patient themselves can start to enjoy what life there is then. And we try to support that by we ask every patient, what do you still have as life goals? What are some things you still want to achieve?
Yeah.
And then through some special funding we've been able to acquire, we try to help meet their bucket list items. It's not always a trip to Disney World. It's some of the simpler things. We had a patient here last month up in this area. He loved polka music, and his condition was such that he couldn't get out to a place that would have polka music. So we brought polka music players into his home, and they had a polka event right at his house. It's little things like that that really bring enjoyment. About 4 years ago, we had a patient over in the Massillon area. Her desire expressed to our care staff was that she have a prom. And I was fairly new with hospice then, so I asked the obvious, okay, why didn't you have a prom when you were 18? Because this lady was in her 70s.
Yeah.
She was pregnant when she was 18.
Oh, bless
her
her.
parents would not let her continue in school, so she missed her prom and spent her whole adult life wanting that. So our volunteers got together. They actually brought in a lot of her classmates who were still living in the Massillon area. One of the churches provided us a social hall. We had music. We had refreshments. We were able to get a bridal gown place to donate a dress for her. She was queen of the prom. On the program was her picture, and my associate did on the inside what were movies that were famous then, what were music and books. And my associate's name is Erica. Erica said, "You're kind of from back then. Did they have movies?" Yes, Erica, we had movies.
Yeah.
They were silent, but we had movies back then. So anyhow, this lady experienced her prom, and 2 weeks later she was gone,
Wow.
which is so often the case.
Yeah.
They meet a life goal, and then they feel they can move on.
I bet you see that quite often, that it almost seems like a person kind of knows when, once I've done this, this, and this, then they're ready to let go and move on to as you say, change addresses, basically.
Yes.
And they're ready and excited for the next thing. If they're a believer,
Yes.
even looking forward to the next thing.
Yeah. We see it often right
Yeah.
after the holidays. Like this is a time of year that we have more deaths than we normally would because people have hung on, to celebrate the holiday, to honor their Lord, and to sometimes see loved ones that maybe are from out of town. So seeing that child or that sister or that brother, and then they will let go.
Yeah, yeah. I know someone, I'll say, it was my mother. She wanted to live longer than her mother had lived. And she set this goal for herself that my grandmother had passed away 5 days after her 81st birthday.
Is that right?
And on the 6th day after her 81st birthday, she said, "I did it, kids." And basically, and that was it. That was her last day.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it is interesting, isn't it, that a person can set a goal like that. It's almost like you have a little bit of a say in when you go home.
You do, yeah.
Very interesting. I'm sure you have
we
so
see
many
it
good
often.
stories. Wow.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what hospice looks like now. How does that work?
So, I'm a patient, or I have a loved one that's a patient, and I call a local hospice. Before we're done, we'll talk a little bit about our hospice and some things that make us unique. But you call. Usually it's an admission nurse that will come out and do an evaluation. And if in the evaluation it looks as though they meet that criteria, and that is approved by the 2 doctors I mentioned earlier, and they're admitted, then immediately a care team surrounds that patient. Care team is a medical director, it's a nurse, aides. Quite often in reflecting on the ministry, we hear so much about aides because they're the ones that come into the home, and they help bathe, and they help feed, and they help bring comfort and actually stress relief to that family that fortunately doesn't have to do this very often. Most of us don't, but once or twice in our lives need to face death and know what to do for a loved one that's going through that. We also have chaplains that are a part of that team, social workers that really ask some of the questions that people need to be thinking about toward the end of life, around funeral plans and around assets and around all those kinds of things. So they perform kind of a facilitator
the business
role.
part as well.
Yeah, and then just understanding, some of the things that can be out there that will help them. Families are clueless sometimes as to some of the resources that are out there, and our social workers can lead them to that support. Volunteers, and I say that in the equal way that I said everyone else. We have wonderful volunteers that provide our patients a lot of comfort and care. So it's that whole team that is really around that patient.
We think of hospice as being in a home, in a person's home. Do you also serve in a nursing home facility or in the hospital? If a person is in the hospital, can hospice come in there as well?
Yes to all of that.
Okay.
Research has shown most of us, when we come to the end of our life, we want to be in our own home. Yeah, that's where we'd like to be. Sometimes that's not possible. Perhaps that patient has had a prolonged illness and they've had to move to a nursing facility. Well, if that nursing facility will work with us, and many do, we provide the end-of-life care, and they continue to provide the everyday care that nursing homes do a wonderful job of providing. In a hospital, we work with hospitals as well, and then we're very blessed. We have our own inpatient facility. It's a 12-bed unit, and we serve patients from all the counties we serve. We serve Tuscarora, Stark, Carroll, and Columbiana counties. And those patients will come to that facility. Sometimes it's not where they pass. They'll come in. Our goal is to stabilize them, get their symptoms under control, and then get them back home. Or maybe they come in for respite. Medicare does provide that. That's a relief to the caregiver.
Yes.
If you've ever had a loved one that's ill, you know it takes a toll on you. And so they come in for up to 5 days at a time, respite care, where they can come and visit and love their loved one, but they don't have to worry about all the other things they do when they're at home. Or maybe they're going on a trip. Maybe they have to go out of town for a wedding or a funeral. Then they can have their loved one in our care for that respite stay. Or the third is end of life, where it's determined continuous care, 24-hour care. Because when we care for someone in their home, we go in with nurses, we go in with aides, we go in with all this other care team. We're not there 24/7. We're in the inpatient unit, hospice house, we are. So,
where is that located?
Our hospice house is on Commercial Avenue in New Philadelphia. Yeah.
And how can people contact you? Because that does seem like in vacations and so forth, as you mentioned. I do know of a case where a woman was at the end of life. She was taken to the hospital, and then for one reason or another, the nursing home was not able to take her back. So your facility would have been perfect in that case because the family was frantic. What do they do now?
Sure.
So how does that work? How do they contact you and move this person?
First, they need to be admitted to our hospice care. And then as that care team evaluates, if they determine that they really need to be in the inpatient facility, then they would move into that facility. Our 800 number is 800-947-7284, or they can visit our website, which is www.mymyhospice.org. And the website really guides them through a lot of the same things we're talking about.
Perfect.
I didn't mention that we really care for patients in some other circumstances as well. It's unusual. We've had some that are in jails.
Oh, my goodness. All right, we're going to want to get into that.
Okay.
We have to take a break.
Okay, no problem.
We will be back, and let's pick up right there when we get back after these words. You're listening to Our Community.